A secret letter can change an entire $1 million empire. Do you want to know why? Adrian Cole stood motionless in front of the large mirror in his luxurious dressing room, a place that had witnessed countless preparations for extravagant events and award ceremonies where he always appeared flawless, tailored suits, a gleaming Swiss watch on his wrist, and the confident smile of a successful CEO. But tonight, the reflection staring back at him was entirely different. A middle-aged man with a stern face, wearing a faded old shirt, worn-out jeans and scuffed leather shoes that had lost their shine. A shadow of himself, or more accurately, the image of a stranger. Adrian took a deep breath, his hand brushing over the thick stubble he had deliberately let grow for a week, a natural disguise that made him look like an average office worker exhausted after a long day. He was not an actor, but this disguise was not simply to hide his identity. It felt like a ritual, a cleansing that forced him to shed the polished exterior of a man at the top to become just another ordinary person, close enough to touch the truth he had ignored for years. The complaints of his employees echoed in his mind like a mournful song. We work like machines. We're exhausted. No one up there cares if we're still human. The anonymous reviews in the internal report from the night before had kept him awake, lying in his large but cold bed, every word cutting into his pride like a knife. Adrian Cole, founder of the Cole's Prime Steakhouse empire, a chain of restaurants celebrated across the United States, once took pride in creating a dining experience praised by every magazine. But beneath that glory, a darker reality was growing, consuming the spirit of the very people who had built his reputation. He could not ignore it any longer. Adrian's gaze swept across the elegant room, where everything radiated perfection. The warm glow of crystal chandeliers, shelves lined with prestigious awards, and a large portrait of him receiving the Entrepreneur of the Year award displayed prominently on the wall. He stepped closer to the picture, staring at the proud face in the photo, and felt an unexpected bitterness. The man in that portrait seemed like a stranger to the Adrian standing here now. In a moment of impulsive but determined resolve, he tore the picture from its frame, the glass shattering loudly as it hit the floor, then ripped the photo into pieces, letting them scatter at his feet like shards of pride he no longer wished to hold on to. "I need to see the truth with my own eyes," Adrian said quietly, his deep voice carrying the weight of a promise to himself. Closing a small suitcase with only a few simple outfits inside, he sat down and typed a quick note into his phone under a fake name. Andrew Anderson, a businessman traveling on a work trip who would be dining at one of Cole's Prime Steakhouse branches. The location was no coincidence. It was the Chicago branch, the very first jewel in his empire, the one that had once made him proudest. Adrian knew that if there were problems in the system, they would certainly show there, because it was where every standard had been enforced most strictly. Before leaving, he stood in front of the mirror one last time. The man looking back was no longer the admired and powerful CEO, but an ordinary who could sit at any table in his own restaurant without being recognized. And that was exactly what he needed, a chance to step into the world of the people he had unknowingly neglected, to listen to them, and to understand whether the empire he had built was crushing the very people who had helped create it. A long night awaited, but Adrian no longer hesitated. He gripped his car keys tightly, drew in a deep breath, and walked out, leaving behind the luxurious room, a world of excess that had once defined him, but now belonged only to the past. The old silver Honda Civic rolled through the busy streets of Chicago, a stark contrast to the rows of gleaming Mercedes and Bentleys parked outside the restaurant. Adrian Cole, now Andrew Anderson to the world, gripped the steering wheel tightly. A strange mix of anticipation and unease tightened in his chest. He had been here countless times before, but never as just another customer sitting in a quiet corner, simply observing. In the past, he had arrived like royalty, greeted with respectful glances and a warm laughter from staff. But tonight, he was no longer Adrian Cole, CEO of this prestigious restaurant chain. He was just another face in the crowd, a nobody. And that was exactly what he needed. As the car stopped in front of Cole's prime steakhouse, his heart began to race. The building was still as grand and impressive as he remembered, its glossy black glass reflecting the warm golden lights inside, and the neon sign with gold lettering shining proudly in the night. On the surface, it looked like a jewel in the heart of the city, exactly what he had envisioned when he first opened this branch. But now that same glow only made him wonder what darkness might be hidden beneath this polished exterior. Adrian stepped out of the car, pulling the collar of his worn shirt higher, trying not to draw attention. Walking past the line of luxury cars, he felt like an intruder in a world that no longer felt like his. The valet staff, trained to bow and smile at every guest, glanced at him briefly with suspicion before turning their attention to a couple stepping out of a brand new Porsche. He noticed immediately. To them, he was just an ordinary customer. Or worse, someone who might not even afford dinner here. Inside, the soft sound of a classic jazz tune blended with the gentle clink of crystal glasses, creating an atmosphere of elegance and refinement. The polished dark wood, the carefully adjusted golden lighting, everything radiated the sophisticated charm he had once proudly called a living work of art. But tonight, through eyes clearer than ever, he began to notice things he had ignored before. A young woman approached the reception desk, her blonde hair neatly tied back, her uniform immaculate, a name tag pinned to her chest. Chloe. "Good evening. Welcome to Cole's Prime Steakhouse. Do you have a reservation?" Her voice was sweet and professional, but Adrian caught a flash of tension in her eyes. "Yes, under Anderson. Table for one," he answered, keeping his voice low and slightly rough, just as he had practiced for days. Chloe lowered her head to check the reservation list, her movements quick and efficient, but her shoulders were slightly tense, her smile faintly strained. Adrian noticed that too. A technically perfect smile, but it lacked the warmth and pride he had always demanded from his staff, a smile that was supposed to come from genuine satisfaction in their work. "Your table is ready. Please follow me," Chloe said as she turned to lead him through the dining area. As they walked past the rows of tables, Adrian observed quietly. Everything seemed flawless, like a perfectly choreographed performance. Staff moved swiftly and silently. Tables were cleared the moment customers left, and the sound of cheerful conversations floated across the room. But with the eyes of the man who had built this empire, he began to see what he had once ignored, or perhaps chosen not to see. At an open kitchen counter, a server accidentally dropped a tray of water, the sound of shattering glass echoing briefly. Within seconds, everything was cleaned up, as if nothing had happened. But what caught Adrian's attention wasn't the accident itself. It was the reaction of the manager standing nearby. The man barked sharply, his voice loud enough to make the nearby staff freeze for a split second before they forced themselves back into their perfect smiles. Adrian narrowed his eyes slightly, a moment that lasted only seconds, but to him it was a warning sign. Chloe led him to a small table in a secluded corner, the perfect spot to watch both the dining room and the kitchen. "Would you like something to drink while you wait?" she asked. "Just water, thank you," Adrian replied, his eyes still quietly scanning the room. As Chloe walked away, he exhaled slowly, his hand tightening slightly on the table. From this moment on, Adrian Cole, or Andrew Anderson, had officially begun his journey to uncover the truth hidden behind the glittering lights of the very empire he had built. And he knew this was only the beginning. Less than 5 minutes after Chloe left, a gentle voice beside him pulled Adrian out of his thoughts. "Good evening, Mr. Anderson. I'm Elena Harper, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." He looked up and found himself staring into a pair of striking green eyes, bright with intelligence and warmth, but carefully masked by a weariness she couldn't quite hide. Elena looked to be in her mid-20s, her reddish-brown hair neatly tied back, her uniform impeccably pressed, almost perfect. But Adrian, with the sharp and experienced eyes of someone who had spent years building an empire, instantly noticed what others wouldn't. Faint, dark circles under her eyes, calloused fingertips, and the subtle way she shifted her weight to her left side, as if easing the pressure off a leg that was in pain. "It's a pleasure to serve you," Elena said with a smile that would convince any ordinary customer it was genuine. But Adrian saw it for what it was, a smile held in place by willpower rather than joy. "Have you dined at Cole's Prime Steakhouse before?" she asked, her tone soft, perfectly trained, exactly the kind of service standard he had once demanded. Adrian shook his head, staying in character. "No, a colleague recommended it. I heard the steaks here are the best in the city." Elena nodded, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine light crossed her eyes. "They're right. We're very proud of our 28-a-day dry-aged ribeye, seasoned with our signature blend for a unique flavor. I highly recommend it." Adrian watched her as she spoke, her hands moving swiftly as she noted the order without even glancing down. Her fingers were skilled and steady, but he caught sight of small burn marks along her knuckles, signs of long hours carrying hot plates. He nodded slowly, taking it all in. "Then I'll have the ribeye, medium rare, and a glass of your house red wine." Elena's smile softened, more real this time, as though she was pleased he trusted her recommendation. "Excellent choice. I'll bring the wine out first." As she walked away, Adrian's eyes followed her, watching how she moved between tables. She didn't just serve food. She crafted an experience. With an elderly couple, she asked about their health like an old friend. With a young man struggling with the menu, she patiently explained each dish, adding a little anecdote about how the chef prepared it. Adrian saw in her the kind of employee who had once made him proud when he first founded the restaurant. But he also saw something else. Moments that lasted only a second. The quick glance at her watch with worried eyes. The slight wince when she balanced a tray on her left leg. The deep breath she took, as if calming herself before approaching the next table. Sitting in his quiet corner, Adrian felt a weight settle in his chest. He had always believed that by setting the highest standards, His staff would be happy and proud to serve. But Elena, with her unwavering dedication tinged with exhaustion, was showing him a harsher truth, that dedication might be costing too much. And for the first time, he wondered how many other Elenas were forcing themselves to endure the same thing in the very empire he had built. As Elena walked away, Adrian slowly took a sip of water, letting his gaze drift quietly across the room. From his discreet corner table, he had a clear view of the entire dining area and the kitchen doors swinging open and shut in a constant rhythm. Everything operated like a machine programmed down to the second. But the longer he watched, the more he realized that this so-called perfection was actually a sign that something was wrong. The staff moved so quickly they were almost running, their forced smiles appearing all at once as if they had been trained to hide something beneath the surface. Adrian's eyes stopped on a young server, his name tag reading Marcus. The boy couldn't have been more than 22, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool air. Conditioning. He carried tray after tray, his feet in constant motion, his eyes shadowed with a tension that looked more like fear, as if he were racing against time. In another corner, a middle-aged woman with streaks of grey in her hair, Diana Brooks, moved with painstaking caution, every step deliberate. Adrian noticed the reason immediately. She was hiding the pain in her leg, her slight limp betraying her even as she kept a gentle smile for the guests. Adrian swallowed slowly, unease rising in his chest. This was not how he wanted his staff to work. He had always believed that a happy employee created perfect service. But what he was seeing now was not happiness. It was exhaustion, masked by professional skill. Just then, the sound of shattering glass echoed from the open kitchen. A server had dropped a tray of water, shards scattering across the floor. In that brief moment, Adrian caught sight of the manager standing nearby, a heavy-set man in a straining suit, turning sharply to bark an order, his voice sharp enough to make everyone around him freeze. Within seconds, things returned to normal. The smiles reappeared as if nothing had happened. But that fleeting moment told Adrian everything he needed to know. Beneath this flawless exterior was a suffocating atmosphere, where people worked like machines, terrified of making mistakes. His eyes wandered until they found Eleanor, standing near the bar, subtly shifting her weight to her good leg. In a moment that no one seemed to notice, she closed her eyes briefly, took a deep breath, and whispered something under her breath before continuing on with that soft smile. Adrian's hand tightened into a fist. Those smiles, once the pride of his restaurants, now looked more like masks. And suddenly, he felt like a blind man, one who had willingly covered his eyes to the truth for far too long. The steak was brought out with flawless precision as always, the meat a perfect brown, the fat crisped to a golden layer, its aroma rich enough to impress anyone. Adrian cut a small piece with his knife, but his mind was no longer on the food. His eyes kept following Elena as she moved quickly between tables, her gentle smile unwavering, yet her left leg still carried a faint limp. He could feel her exhaustion in every efficient movement, and suddenly the perfect dish in front of him felt harder to swallow. Elena returned to his table, a tray of water in hand. "Is everything all right, Mr. Anderson?" Her voice held the warmth of a model employee. "Perfect," Adrian replied, keeping up his act. But as she set the glass down, he caught her glancing quickly around the room, as if checking for something. Then, with a movement so fast the average diner might not have noticed, she slid a small folded note under the edge of his plate. Her smile never faltered as she said, "If you need anything else, please let me know." And just like that, she was gone, blending back into the rhythm of the busy restaurant. Adrian's heartbeat quickened. He waited until he was certain no one was watching, then carefully lifted the edge of his plate and pulled the note free. His hand trembled slightly as he unfolded it, and the hurried words inside left him motionless for a moment. "I know who you are, Mr. Cole. I recognized you the moment you walked in. This restaurant is killing us, not just me, but everyone. We work 60 hours a week for pay that can't even cover rent. We're afraid to call in sick, afraid of being punished for the smallest mistakes. If you really want the truth, meet me at the back entrance at 11 p.m. Please don't ignore this. We need you." Signed, Elena Harper. Adrian read it 3 times, each word cutting into his pride like a blade. Eleanor had recognized him from the start, yet she had served him with the same care she gave every other customer. She had chosen to trust him, even at the risk of losing her job if anyone discovered she had passed him this note. Looking up, he found Eleanor standing a few tables away, smiling brightly at a family with small children. But for just a brief second, when their eyes met, he saw more than exhaustion in hers. He saw fragile hope, a silent plea for help. Adrian clenched the note tightly in his hand, his chest heavy. Tonight, he would have to be there, and from this moment on, everything had changed. That night, Chicago was draped in a thin layer of mist, the yellow streetlights stretching into trembling streaks across the damp sidewalks. Adrian parked the old silver Honda Civic in a dark corner behind the restaurant. The watch on his wrist read 10:55 p.m. He sat in the car, fingers gripping the folded note tightly, his heart pounding as if he were about to step into battle. He had faced countless multi-million-dollar negotiations, yet never had he felt this tense. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a confession, and he was the one who needed to hear it. At exactly 11 p.m., the back door of the restaurant creaked open. Elena stepped out, no longer in her neat uniform, but in a light grey sweater and worn jeans. The yellow light highlighted the exhaustion on her face, but her eyes burned with a strange, determined resolve. When she spotted Adrian, she moved quickly toward him, each step cautious, as if afraid someone might be watching. "Thank you for coming," Elena said, her voice soft but steady. Adrian nodded, his eyes locked on her every expression. "I want to hear everything," he replied. She stayed silent for a moment, as though weighing just how much she could trust him. Finally, she took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with every word. She told him about Maria, a single mother working 2 shifts every day just to pay rent, who hadn't seen her children in daylight for 3 weeks. She spoke of Carlos, a veteran chef who had been working with a fractured wrist for 2 months, too afraid of losing his job to ask for time off. And finally, she spoke about herself, a young woman who had put off her dream of studying nursing for 3 years because she couldn't afford to take even a single day off. "We're not asking for anything extravagant," Elena said, her voice tightening as emotion broke through. "We just want to live like normal people, not machines terrified of being replaced at any moment." Adrian listened in silence, each word striking him like a blade to the chest. In that moment, he wasn't a CEO. He was simply a man forced to face a painful truth of his own making. Elena looked straight into his eyes, her gaze filled with both hope and despair. "I believe you're not heartless, Mr. Cole. If I'm wrong, at least I tried." Adrian swallowed slowly, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for trusting me. I won't ignore this." And in that instant, he knew, from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. Eleanor leaned lightly against the old brick wall, her breath forming faint clouds in the cold night air. The yellow glow of the street lamp cast soft light across her face, highlighting the determination in her steady gaze. Adrian stood opposite her, arms crossed, but his expression was no longer that of a CEO scrutinizing a subordinate. It was the look of a man truly listening. "If you really want change, Mr. Cole, start with the basics," Eleanor said, her voice calmer now after spilling her heart out. "We don't need fancy speeches or big meetings. We need a living wage, reasonable hours, and above all, respect." Adrian nodded slowly, as if committing every word to memory. "Be more specific," he said, his tone deep but softer than usual. Elena didn't hesitate. It was clear she had been thinking about this for a long time. "Pay enough so we don't have to work back shifts just to make rent. Don't make 60-hour weeks the standard. Give paid sick days, and if possible, offer chances for us to grow, classes, or support programs for learning. We don't want to work here forever." She paused for a brief moment, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. "But at least while we're here, we want to be treated like real human beings." Adrian looked at her, a wave of guilt and sadness rising in his chest. He had once proudly told the press he built a dream workplace, yet now the very people who had made his success possible had to stand in a dark alley asking for the bare minimum. He swallowed against the tightness in his throat. "Eleanor, I promise you, I will change this. Not just for you, but for everyone." Elena held his gaze, as if trying to read whether he truly meant it. Finally, she gave a small nod. "I believe you, because if we can't, we have no one else left to count on." In that moment, Adrian's hand tightened into a fist. This was no longer about protecting a reputation or preserving profits. This was a promise he had to keep, not only to help people like Elena, but to save the very pride that had once driven him to build this empire in the first place. The next morning, as the sunlight touched the glass towers of the city, Adrian was already at the main office of Cole's Prime Steakhouse. The large conference room, luxurious with its long walnut table and high-end leather chairs, looked exactly as he had once proudly showcased to the press. But today, Adrian no longer saw it as dazzling. On the table were not the usual financial reports, but a stack of employee files he had spent the entire night reading, each page filled with the stories behind familiar names. When the board members entered, they looked confident, ready for another meeting where record-breaking revenue would be praised. But Adrian didn't let them begin with financial reports. He stood up, his eyes sweeping across each person, his voice deep and steady. "Today, we are not talking about profit. We are talking about the people, the ones working themselves to exhaustion to create that profit." A soft chuckle came from Robert, the chief financial officer. "Adrian, I understand you're feeling emotional, But we're running a business, not a charity. Patricia, a long-time board member, added, "If you change policies, profits will drop. The shareholders won't agree." Adrian looked at them, his eyes sharper than ever. He opened one of the files and laid it flat on the table. Maria Gonzalez, 5 years of service, never missed a single shift. Yet she still has to work 2 jobs to raise 3 children. Carlos Rivera, one of our chefs, denied time off to treat a fractured wrist for 2 months. Do you see their names on those revenue reports you're so proud of? No. But they are the ones who make those numbers possible. The room fell silent for a moment before Robert's voice cut through. Tense. So what exactly are you proposing? A system-wide wage increase? Shorter standard hours? And how do you plan to cover the loss? Adrian didn't hesitate. He slid another report across the table. If we reduce turnover by just 50%, we save at least $2.3 million annually in recruitment and training costs. That's not even counting the brand reputation and increased revenue from loyal customers when service improves. This isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. A heated discussion broke out. Some members strongly opposed, but for the first time, several others sat quietly, deep in thought. Adrian took a deep breath, his voice firmer now. If we keep treating employees like machines, one day they will stop running. And when that happens, all those numbers you're protecting will mean nothing. The tension in the room was heavy. Patricia finally spoke, her tone softer this time. We could start with a pilot program in Chicago. Adrian nodded, his eyes shining with determination. This was only the beginning, but at least the door to change had finally cracked open. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the large glass windows of the main office, casting a warm glow on Adrian's calm yet determined face. He had spent the entire night rewriting the pilot program plan recently approved by the board. There were no dry financial charts this time, only a detailed list. Raising the minimum wage to a livable standard, creating more flexible work schedules, providing paid sick leave, and most importantly, introducing an educational support program for employees who wanted to advance their careers. He knew this was not a complete solution, but it was the first step toward real change. That afternoon, Adrian arrived at the Chicago branch. This time he was not in disguise, no longer hiding behind ordinary clothes. He walked into the restaurant in a simple suit, still carrying the presence of a true leader. The employees were surprised to see the owner himself visit. Their faces were a mix of curiosity and nervousness. But what caught Adrian's attention most was Elena's gaze. She was standing near the bar, pausing for a brief second when she saw him before quickly regaining her composure and stepping forward. "Elena," Adrian called, his voice not loud, but firm enough for the entire room to hear. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with both surprise and anticipation. "Thank you for your letter. It changed everything." Elena looked slightly startled, then nodded quietly without saying a word. Adrian turned to the entire staff, his voice steady and resolute. "From today, this place will no longer run like a machine. I want every one of you to know that you matter. We are starting a new policy trial here. And if it succeeds, it will be implemented across the entire system." A ripple of murmurs filled the room. Marcus, the young waiter, blinked in disbelief, and Diana placed a hand on her chest as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Eleanor stood still, but Adrian noticed something different in her eyes, a glimmer of true hope. He stepped closer to her, his tone softer, yet sincere. "I need your help to make this work. Are you ready?" Elena looked at him for a long moment, then nodded firmly. "I'll help, as long as you're serious about this." Adrian gave her a small smile, the first genuine smile he had managed in days, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of relief. In that moment, surrounded by the bustling energy of the restaurant, Adrian felt something far deeper than profits or reputation. He was starting something new, not just for his employees, but for himself, to make this restaurant chain once again a true source of pride. A week after the announcement of the new policy, the Chicago branch of Cole's Prime Steakhouse had begun to change. There were no more exhausting late night shifts. Work schedules were now more reasonable. Employees received paid sick leave, and most importantly, faces that once wore forced smiles now showed genuine ones. Adrian returned to the branch, not to inspect, but to witness the first results of this change. As he stepped through the door, he saw Marcus chatting with a colleague, his face bright and relaxed, a stark contrast to the nervous young man Adrian first met. Diana was guiding a new employee on how to serve customers, her voice calm and gentle, no longer holding the quiet tension she once carried. And Elena, the one who had started all of this, stood by the bar, smiling as she took orders. She caught Adrian's eyes, paused for a brief moment, then smiled. A real, warm, and confident smile. Adrian walked closer. "Things look better now, don't they?" he asked, his voice calm, but filled with unmistakable joy. Elena nodded, her eyes reflecting quiet satisfaction. "We can't change everything in just a week, but people are starting to believe this is truly different." She paused, her voice softer, slower. "Thank you for keeping your word." Adrian looked around the restaurant, taking in a deep breath. He had never thought a promise could feel so heavy, but he had also never felt one so meaningful. He turned back to Elena, his voice steady and firm. "I'm not just keeping my word. I'll do more than that. This policy will be applied to the entire system, every branch, every employee. And I want you to work with me to make sure no one gets left behind." Eleanor looked surprised for a moment. Then her smile grew brighter. "I will," she said simply and decisively. In that moment, Adrian knew he was no longer the man who once sat in a luxurious office, proud only of dry revenue numbers. He was rebuilding his empire, this time, not just on perfect dishes, but on the people who made them possible. As he stepped out of the restaurant, the late afternoon sunlight stretched across the street. Adrian stopped, turning back to look at the familiar golden sign. He smiled faintly and whispered to himself as if making a promise. "Cole's Prime Steakhouse will not just be famous for its food, but for how we treat the people who create it." And for the first time in many years, he felt truly proud. An empire is not built solely on perfect dishes, but on how we treat the people behind them. That is the real secret to lasting success, something many leaders tend to forget. If you agree that respecting employees is the greatest value of all, hit like and subscribe to help share meaningful stories like this. And leave a comment with the words, "Keep the promise." If you believe true change always begins with a sincere commitment.